were dishing all the dirt on this. And so that really putting this spark of when I was a child, and then all of a sudden it became very much alive of what is history hiding and
Right.
why?
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks To, where our guest today is Ruta Sepetys, and we are going to be talking about her ninth book and her first book for adults called A Fortune of Sand. Now, I have loved Ruta's work since her first young adult book, where I went to her first luncheon and had read the book in advance and was ready to do a Q&A with her, which I think I actually did across the table. That was Between Shades of Grey. It was phenomenal. It's a New York Times bestseller. It was a Carnegie Medal finalist. But I was so happy to be at the table that day talking about this really smart book that I still think about today. And that was many years ago. We won't date ourselves. So this conversation is taking place before her new book comes out. So I'm going to share for you some early praise for A Fortune of Sand. The first thing is from Ann Patchett. You know that woman, Ann Patchett? Yes, the author who has the bookstore. Ruta is a literary citizen of the highest order, a true friend to readers, writers, and booksellers. Her books are moving, fascinating, and meticulously researched. She makes history and live in order that we may learn from it. I completely agree. Fiona Davis is a huge favorite of us at the site, says that you beautifully capture the madcap days of Prohibition in the Detroit suburbs, centered around the wealthy Lennox clan. Underneath the guilt, however, crackles abound, inspired by real-life events of the time and uncovered through her impeccable research. So with that, welcome, Ruta. It's lovely to be in talking to you again and have you here as a guest.
I'm so happy to be here. Carol, I said before we started this, I think you believed in me before I believed in me. And now to be chatting with you.
I know, we're all these years later.
I know, it's great. It's great.
Loved that book. And I was at my health club and somebody said, I've read this amazing author that I wasn't familiar with before, and it was you. And I was telling her about all the other books you had, and she comes up and talks to me about them, which is it's just lovely. Really, really lovely.
Thank you.
So let's start by you telling us about the book instead of me doing my interpretation. You wrote it.
Sure. A Fortune of Sand, set in Detroit in the 1920s, and follows the story of an automotive dynasty, the Lennox family, who is behaving very badly and gaining a ton of power while doing it. And their youngest daughter, Marjorie, she uncovers a web of lies in the family and then has to face this terrifying truth. Just how far will a dynasty go to keep their secrets? And it's based on long buried stories that I uncovered from Detroit and the auto industry during that time period when Detroit was considered the Paris of the Midwest. So some people have said it's Downton Abbey in Detroit with a family of talented Mr. Ripleys. I've heard it's Succession meets the Royal Tenenbaums. The book belongs to the reader. It's up to the reader to provide the comp, I think.
But I really love that it's set in Detroit and it's a place where you grew up. You grew up living in that area. So you have knowledge of it, but you're thinking of it as now where it's Motor City. And it was like the end of Motor City. I mean, it's just where Detroit has gone and what's gone, all the transformation it's gone through. So let's talk about that, of what the time was like back when you have the book set in the early 30s.
Yes, and I think probably every city, every state has something that was once so vital, but has now vanished, right? There were people, places, products, powers that once ruled, and then they disappeared.
Right.
And so for me, because I grew up, I was born in Detroit, raised in a suburb of Detroit, I saw this crumbling grandeur. I mean, the home that my grandparents lived in literally is no longer there. But what I found also is that it didn't just relate to the automotive industry. It was a lot of industries. But the main takeaway for me, as I began peeling back the layers of Detroit and this 1920s period, is that the narrative that we've accepted about the 1920s, it's incomplete. Sure, there were flappers and jazz, but not everyone lived like that. And when I was peeling back the layers, what I found was this odd tension, right, between freedom and fear. and fortune and facade. And it was that tension that really became the core and the center point of A Fortune of Sand.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Who do you think this person is? And are they really who you think they are? And how they're really all vying for power. It's all coming back to Cadillac and Ford and this and that and what's going on. And this was Detroit in the 20s was something I didn't know anything about. I didn't, okay, cars, yada yada. But what did intrigue you to write it and to once again give voice something that we don't know about? Because this is a story that I haven't seen written about. I haven't seen things coming out about this area. So tell me where you came up with this is it.
Well, the spark, and I wonder if you have a something like this that you can refer back to. I was 9 years old when the fashion writer for the Detroit News invited my family to an event at her home. Well, her home, Carol, ended up being this storied 1920s mansion. And I mean, I just didn't grow up in something like that. And so here I am, this young kid, and I discover that this house has hidden tunnels and a hidden speakeasy. And that was the first point where I thought, oh my goodness, homes in Detroit and Grosse Pointe have this? Why? Why do they have secret tunnels? And where? And of course, it was because of the rum runners and all of this, and liquor and prohibition. But it lit a spark in my 9-year-old head and heart that stayed, I don't know, how do I, like, kind of in the attic of my memory.
Yeah.
And then one of my research processes for any book that I'm working on, I read the newspaper from the day of the year that I'm working on. And I was researching something in 27. So if I were reading the paper today, it's May 21st. I'm reading New York Times, May 1927. And I came upon a story in the New York Times that talked about this incredible heist that happened in Detroit at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And just because I'm from Detroit and I have this fascination, I thought, ooh, wow. So I hop over to the Detroit newspapers. There was nothing. There was nothing about it. And I thought, wait a minute. And we know back then newspapers were powerful things, right?
Yes.
And I thought, who is paying to bury this story? And the story did show up, but later. And the regional papers, let's say Battle Creek or Port Huron, and Windsor out of Canada, they were dishing all the dirt on this. And so that really putting this spark of when I was a child, and then all of a sudden it became very much alive of what is history hiding and why? What's there? And that's when I really plunged down this rabbit hole and found that there was a connection to the auto industry in it.
And it's also, you always write books about power, those who have power and those who don't have power. And that the newspaper, they had power at that point to suppress, like, don't write anything about this, or you won't get again anything. And two of the characters write obituaries for the paper. So I found it was really great. Like when I'm thinking about like the newspaper and powers, like what are you gonna say in the obituary? How are you gonna phrase who that person is? Same thing.
It was a huge deal when I was doing the research, just from the period. People's obituaries, there would be edits the week after. Such and such is quite disturbed. They wrote a letter to the newspaper. I was very saddened of this line that you left out, or this was currency. How someone was recalled. But oftentimes, again, because you know me and I'm such a researcher, I would read an obituary and read this statement about the person's passing, and I thought, it's been long enough. I can pull the death certificate. And the way the person died was not what was reported in the death certificate. So again, this fortune and facade, this facade. And so when I was writing the book, I thought, what if the narrative architecture of the book could participate in the facade of the era? And I started to think, well, what would that look like? And I decided to, start the book very light and fizzy. So the reader might think, this is kind of light maybe for Ruta. But then as you move into the story, and Marjorie, our main character, is accepted at this arts residency, I wanted the lights to flicker a little bit for the reader. Like, wait a minute, what's going on? And for things to all of a sudden narrow, as they did, because the 1920s, it was, it was, flappers and booze and, shoes were wet with gin, But then at the heart of it, wow, there was some really dark stuff going on.
And it was all behind the scenes. And it was
Complete.
like even her brother and sister dropping her off and saying, this is what you're going to do. It's like nobody knows really where you are. And she gets there and she has these strange sets of rules. Like your basket of food will be put outside your room, but you have to go get the newspapers and they must be at the doors by 7:30 in the morning. And who's delivering the newspapers? I mean, nothing is as it seems. Like nothing is, there's like a shape shift going on of who these people really are and what kind of control they really have over you. And at the same time, she's lying to her family. Their brothers and sister are lying and say she's up at the cabin, like she's just away at the cabin.
But you mentioned control, and that's it. When I was researching, I found how often control over women during this time period, it was couched as safeguarding
Yeah.
or or concern. But really, when you looked at it, it was control. And then when I was seeing it through history, I started to see it everywhere.
Right,
And people
right.
would say, I'm so concerned for fill in the blank. And really, what they're trying to do is control. And when I thought back, even in my own ancestry, and I wonder about you, you know, I had family members who were, there was this exertion of control over their
Mhm,
life and over their
mhm.
destiny and over their path. And this person thinks they're artistic. Oh no, and it was because it wasn't suitable for the family, not because it wasn't suitable for the woman herself who was this creative genius. So it was really interesting to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's like, wait, you're going to be creative. And the way she was creating, she would drape silk and she would drape whatever and be able to come up with a garment. She would be able to come up with, what she wanted to do. And the money, there's a lot of money in this family. And there was also two generations. There's a generation that's supposed to be handing the business over to the next one, but is holding off on it. Really, because I think they think he's going to not be able to do it the way it should be done. And as a result, you've got these elders and you've got well, it's got a bird that dies. I mean, the bird that dies, it becomes like a really big deal. And I'm like, woof. I don't know if the bird's going to come back or like what's going to happen, but that was like really interesting too. But it's, the characters are drawn so well, even the unlikable ones, even the ones that I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh, 5 minutes with you and I go out of my mind. So,
Well, and I think that was kind of the syncopated rhythm of the era. When I was researching it, in addition to saying, okay, what's like the narrative prose architecture of this book, but then how do people speak to each other? And listening even to the rhythm of that era, ragtime and that
mhm.
syncopated 2/4. And then when I would listen to radio broadcasts and how they would banter back and forth. And in this family in particular, because everyone has their own secrets,
Mhm.
there is this, again, this facade, this fraud, and as you said, this older generation hesitant to let go to the younger generation because will they keep the secrets? Will they, or will they spill it and ruin it all? And so that was a really fun part of it. And even the parakeet that you mentioned, the bird, that came out of my research. Do you know in the death notices that there was, and it was so unbelievable to me that in the back of the book, I put the headline of the obituary,
Yes, yes, I saw that.
Prodigy Parakeet passes. Like, this is the time uh,
Uh-huh.
that this was happening. It was crazy.
It was like this is what we would do. Was there one character that came first? Was there somebody you saw before everybody else?
Oh, good question. No, I saw it more as a dynamic, but definitely I was focusing on the women.
Okay.
We have Marjorie, the youngest daughter. We have her mother, Lila, who's in a very complicated
Yes.
situation. We have the granny, the grandmother character. So we have these, I thought of, as in all sort of dynasties, you have the elder, the grandmother, the mother, and then the daughter. And I focused on Marjorie because I really wanted to zero in on a young woman who's trying to seize her own personal power in a society that's determined to deny it,
Hmm.
and over again. And so, yeah, Marjorie became the focus. But I think I actually, as a woman, relate most to the character of Chet, who's really an oddball kind of a character. She's the one who's writing the obituary,
Obituaries. Yeah.
is obsessed with death. And I loved writing the character of Chet. She was great.
I think Cecilia is pretty funny too. Like we don't have this big grand opening. She's married to a gangster. I mean, it's like Okay,
And
I'm going to have this big party, and yeah, it's you and the gangster, honey.
and that's the way it was. I read this book during my research that absolutely was just gold. And if anyone finds it at a sale, you must buy it. But you have to buy the first edition because there's a subsequent edition and it doesn't have the juicy stuff. It's called We Never Called Him Henry. And
Oh,
it is by Henry Ford's fixer and bodyguard. And he
how?
told all of these stories. And the first edition subsequently went out of print pretty
Right, right.
quickly. And I had to negotiate with an eBay seller to sell me a first edition at a reasonable price. Um, but talked about all these parties. People would lie about the guest list. They would print things in the newspaper about who was coming or who was the architect that built the house, and it was all a lie. And people just showed up and mingled, and there was underworld gangsters with, these gross point people who considered themselves quite elite. And it was just such a surreal world, and I wanted to portray that.
And was there any question there would be a crash? Like, was there any question as you're sitting there, like the way the money was being spent, the booze was being hidden, the cars were being driven? It was,
No, no. And this is what's so fascinating to me as a novelist. I love time periods like this. So the book is set in 1927. This is a time when, the world is still dancing, unaware the music is about to stop, right? We talk about impermanence, talk about impermanence. And knowing that at the very time this was taking place, four bankers were meeting secretly on Long Island, about to make choices that would just turn everything completely upside down. And that tension of knowing what was going to happen. For me, that was really super, super exciting to write these clueless characters.
and it's funny because I'm reading this. I had read The Calamity Club. That's the new Catherine Saga book, and that
Yes.
takes place right afterwards. So you're seeing what that time was actually like and where you were on both sides of it, and also the prices of things and how cheap they really were to us, and it's
Yes.
going on and on.
But also to sometimes the 1920s, and my book, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go into some of these deeper issues that really deserve a lot of attention. But there was a shallowness. There was a
Right.
shallowness to it. I mean, in 1927, at the same time, was the Great Flood, where from Illinois down to Louisiana, an area the size of Scotland was underwater. And what happened to so many communities and so many, and my book is set up in Michigan, but there were so many things that did happen, that no, we didn't hear of in Gatsby, or we didn't.
No, and you think about it, it's 100 years ago. These things are happening like 100 years ago. And what are we actually thinking about of today? It's
Right.
that was the time. I had a feeling you liked writing Marjorie. I just really thought that way. And I also love this line. At one point, Graham says, "Our family business is windshields, Marjorie, glass, an entire fortune built on sand. There's a deep irony there." And my thought is that the entire fortune was breakable. When I was sitting there thinking about the whole thing was breakable at any single moment. And the fact that you had that line about the sand very early in the book, it was way early. And I was like, okay, now I'm getting it. Glass, sand, what? They're really built on nothing. It's built on shifting, and sand shifts, and their
Built on
fortune was
nothing,
shifting.
built on shifting. And I put a line in the book where someone actually said, well, look, Chevrolet is not going to be anywhere. Packard in 100 years is going to be ruling the world, and no one will ever have heard of Chevrolet or these other companies. And
Right.
just the lack of vision, and the whole thing can just come crumbling down. The fragility, the impermanence of life.
Completely, completely. And also, these people are calling it the Paris of the Midwest, and they want it to be Motor City. They don't want it to be known for this. They want it to be known for the cars
Yeah.
and who the car people were that were coming along. And I just found that were really interesting that the part where the conversation when Cadillac started offering cars in many colors and designs, not the basic look that so many cars had. And were you surprised to see something like that in your research? Because you really think the older cars were green, black, gray, brown. That was it.
Yes, and specifically because, growing up in Detroit and having both of my grandfathers, after immigrating, worked for Ford. And my father was a designer and worked with all the automotive companies. And yes, and I knew that Harley Earl and was really and the Earl family was considered like the studio boy, the pretty picture boy,
Yeah.
but not to that extent. But again, I found that people were getting new cars uh, year after year
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it was like changing your coat or your purse.
Yes.
And when you think about the cost and it was again all about, for some people, the look. And I found also that this was a very American construct, that with my other books and other systems of power that I've written about, oftentimes the power came from history and legacy and
Mhm.
ancestry. And this is something that you inherit, right? In the US, it was something that you construct. And that was
Exactly. Oh, that's
fascinating.
good. Yeah.
Fascinating to me, right? That we would construct this and all of a sudden have this performative legitimacy and that people had to respect, because in their own way, they were, to use a modern term, like influencers, right?
Hmm.
And and all of a sudden, this constructed legacy. It was fascinating.
But I had one uncle, uncle, like family friend, and he owned a car dealership. And when he bought it, he sent out notes to all the neighbors, like, I'm having a party, blah, blah, blah. And they said, we thought you already owned one. You have a new car every year. And it was that same thing that every car, every year, people would say, oh, you're going to keep a car 3 years. You would check your mileage. If the mileage got over X, you weren't going to keep the car anymore. I mean, my father asked me about the mileage on my car like so many times. And I'm just there like, it's still running. It's okay, but don't get too many miles on the car. And I'm like, I think that was built to do that, but that
Yes.
wasn't the way people thought. You hit 30,000 miles, the car was gone. You shouldn't have it anymore.
And the internal power shifts then, let's say, between Henry Ford and his son Edsel. Edsel, who had this very big heart and was seeing where things were going, and Henry, who was, history has shown, not a great guy, very, very inventive, and but lacked some empathy and compassion on levels. And just to see that tension internally between the Ford family, where Edsel wanted something, and Henry Ford said, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. The car was like, you can have, the cars can be any color as long as they're black. And and this tension between, yeah. So, and prohibition. This
Yeah.
is this is prohibition, and Detroit being so close to Canada. So booze is coming over the Detroit River in the winter when it would freeze. People were driving their cars over the frozen river, rum runners going back and forth. And then we had the Purple Gang, and as you said, all of these gangsters, and just really a very unique time in.
A gangster could be in your home and be accepted because they brought the booze,
Oh,
or they brought the women, or they brought whatever they were supposed to be bringing that was totally acceptable.
absolutely. Or they came up with the idea to ship booze as floor paint or cough medicine, and all of a sudden they became this entrepreneur, and yeah.
You just sit there and think about, like, how people will construct anything to make money. They will do anything they possibly can. My husband and I were driving down the road. We were on the highway a couple weeks ago, and I said, every car is an SUV, like every single car now coming along. And like, cars don't look distinctive today. They used to look distinctive, and they had the look to them. And that was the time when the cars had a look. Like, if so and so pulled up in their Pierce Arrow, it made a statement. When the Cadillac, the insignia was on the front of the car, it meant something. My husband and my older son like love cars, but none are American. None are American cars. They're Land Rovers and BMWs. And I laugh because there's nothing American about what they're driving at this point. I drive a Yukon. I'm totally happy with it. It's it's not that I don't love cars, like, but I'm just like, this is one less thing to have to think about.
Yes, I agree. But even back in, when I first started driving, oh, I don't know, in the late 70s, early 80s, I had my first car, which was my mom's car, was a rusted out Pinto wagon,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yellow with the wood grain siding. And cars had personalities, even if they
Yes.
weren't expensive cars.
Yes.
A Chevy Monza or a Pinto wagon, I mean, versus a Corvette back in the day,
Yeah.
when you would see these cars that were just, oh my goodness, there's a Corvette. Now to see a vintage Corvette is,
A big deal.
you don't really see that. Certainly, to your point, not in American car culture. Yeah,
We
maybe
used to
with, I should say, maybe Camaro and Mustang a bit.
we
Yeah.
used to have a T-Bird. We sold it last year. We should have sold it much earlier than that, but we sold the T-Bird. And to get somebody to want to buy it was like a really big deal. Whereas years ago, because the younger people now are not looking for that same kind of a vintage car. They're not going for something like that. It's very interesting to see what it's changed. There's another thing you do in this book, and it comes through, it's Dear Coco notes that appear throughout the book, these Dear Coco. Were those always there, or do you go back and write those after the book was?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you. They were always there.
Wow.
Always there. I wanted an interstitial that where the reader again would say, "Wait, what was going on?" And I don't want to,
Yeah.
because it's a bit of a spoiler. But yes, those were always there. I write from the beginning to the end. I know some of my friends, they will say, "Oh, I wrote this piece and then I wrote this piece." And I write, even in my book Salt to the Sea, that had different perspectives.
Yeah.
I head hopped as I wrote. I don't know, it's a quirky thing, but the Dear Coco interstitials come together, I hope, for the reader at the end when they realize what those are.
But those were written along the way. And the titles, TikTok or whatever the titles were, you did those at the same time as well, like new title.
Yes, but I do have to say that as I revised, I'm more of a reviser than a writer.
Mhm.
As I revised, and when I would see the shape that the chapter was taking on and the overall story would take on, I would maybe revise some chapter titles, but many of them did stay. Yeah.
Amazing.
And I think this is my first book that has chapter titles. Yeah. None of my other books do.
And I think it's fun, readers, that when you finish reading the book, go back and look at that chapter and say, why is it called TikTok? Why is this called this? Why is this called that? And I don't think we as readers do that enough because we're on to the next chapter and then on to the next book. But to go back and take a look, if you're doing a book club or whatever, super interesting. I love the newspaper clippings at the back because I was looking at all those titles, including the one about the parakeet. Um, was the title always A Fortune of Sand?
No, it was not. Oh, these are the best questions. No, it was not A Fortune of Sand, which the title, even look at the shimmery silver
Yes.
color. And I do have to say the cover is embedded with a secret. If there's any Michiganders listening or watching, the blue on the cover is Honolulu Blue,
Okay.
which is a tip of the hat to a certain Detroit reference.
Okay.
But no, at first, when I first wrote the book, and I wrote it, and then my publisher shopped it. It was not a book that was under contract. Oh, write this book, and so I wrote it. And the original title was The Lease, and it was a bit more leaning toward a gothic, a bit of a thriller, maybe, about this young woman who, as we know, we've said, Marjorie, she is an artist, and she escapes to sort of this arts residency program that she gets accepted to. And when she arrives, they're thrilled to have her, and they say, "Great, and now you just need to sign the lease."
Document. Yes.
And there are all these rules and restrictions. And so in my mind, and it's funny, sometimes still with my agent, we still call it the lease.
Release.
Only after my brilliant editor, Hillary Tiemann at Ballantine, picked up the manuscript and said, "Oh, no, no, no. This is, that we started to look at it differently." She had me expand the book a bit and write some new scenes and new chapters. She felt that I had turned in maybe 75% of the book, but there was 25% more to write.
Okay.
So, no, originally the lease.
The lease. The lease. I love it. And was this the first cover you saw, or did they play around with that too?
Um, I have to say, this was a really great experience with the cover. They showed me several different comps.
Uh-huh.
And everybody gravitated toward the cover that had, 1920s Art Deco imagery,
Yeah.
and silver, but the color, there were different color schemes. And then when we saw the Honolulu blue and silver, silver just seemed like steel
Oh,
and
yeah.
metal, but also we've got Michigan Lake Light, right? And automotive steel, and all these different
Sewing
elements.
machine, the jewel, the
Yeah,
glass.
the
Yep.
jewel, the hourglass, the sewing machine, the car, the city skyline,
The two people together.
and the different interpretations. Some people have interpreted it and said, yes, this is a story about women and oppression. And then there are other people who have read it and said, no, for me, it was the romance. Like they were all about the romantic element in the book. Other people, it was historical, about Detroit. And so lots of different interpretations.
It's lovely to see what people take away from what you've written and said, I did not. There are times where authors say they meet with book groups and they go, I didn't see that. So tell me where you saw it because I don't remember writing it that way that you saw it, you know?
Completely. And for me, what's most important is the reader's interpretation,
Yeah.
not the author's explanation. The last thing I want to do is push, a certain storyline or moral or history onto the reader. No. And that's what's so great about it. Some people like a book, some people don't. My sister and I, we read the same book and we have these different opinions, and that's what makes a great book discussion.
And I agree because sometimes we'll sit there and say, people will sit down and there's one girl in our book where I just did not like this book. And we're like, okay, let's talk about what you didn't like, why you didn't like it, where it came from, or why are you so crazy about this book? And why do you want to, or why are you suggesting we read it? Like, why do you think we should do it? And we're reading Yesteryear next. And I said to them, I just want to hear what you all have to say about it. Like, I want to see what your interpretations are compared to what I've heard from friends, from the industry, from the author. And I think the pleasure about reading is it's still always your own. You always take away your own story with it, you know?
I spoke to someone in an interview who this really blew my mind, that said that they didn't realize that Dodge, the auto brand Dodge, that there were people behind John and Horace Dodge and
Yes, yes.
Delphine Dodge and the wives that took over after the Dodge brothers died. And this is what I love about historical fiction. It opens a door, and then maybe there's something that sparks the reader to, I don't know, research or look further into it and realize, oh my gosh, the Dodge dynasty. This was a family. This was,
Right.
that there were people behind the products.
And then where are the parallels to today, or what I'm always doing too, is where are all these things that are fragments of genius right now, and where are they going to take us? And where do you say no? And where do you say it's enough? Where's the money enough? Where is the power enough? Because out there it was money and power. It was money and power. And when they kept saying, I just thought the title was brilliant because it's A Fortune of Sand. Sand goes through your fingers, and it just when you lose it, it just you don't hold it. It goes, it falls,
Right.
and it's not solid. It's not solid unless it's wet. It has to have a different consistency. And I just think that when I was reading this, it's like the shifting sands within the book the entire time of what's going on.
Oh, thank you. That's what I intended and I hoped. But that's why, again, book club discussions are so, in reader discussions are so valuable, because sometimes when I'm speaking about what I was thinking, a reader will say, you didn't, I see what you're saying, but you didn't quite hit the mark on that because I didn't feel that. And that's great. I think that's really great.
It's learning from there. So
Yeah.
then, okay, audio has become huge since you first started writing your first book. It was like audio rights to Finland, no big deal. Now it's rights, oh, car, Okay. So the audio is narrated by Saskia Marveland. And what made you select her? What was about her voice that just said, this is perfect?
She is a superstar. She's a superstar narrator. And I have been very fortunate. The audio is done by Penguin, Penguin Audio, and they've involved me in the process. And that's not always the case. Sometimes the publisher will say, we have four narrators and we really like this one, we're going to choose. They might let you listen, but they allowed me, the producers, they got in touch with me and said, who do you have in mind? And I had an actress in mind, which they said, no, we can never, and I won't even mention who, we can't afford her. But then there were so many books, and she's won so many Audis.
Yes,
But
so many.
the reason that I chose her is her, talent to do many different voices and tones. She can do young, old, male, female, and this had a large cast, a large adult cast of characters. And the nuance I thought it might require some, nuance. And she was perfect. And it was funny because I told the producer, and then she got back to me and said, "You're not going to believe this. It's like our conversation went out into the universe." And she said, "Saskia just reached out asking about your book." And I thought, oh, this is incredible. Now, how that happened or whether it was really an agent that, but yeah. And I haven't heard it yet. I'm so excited to hear.
Yeah, I was trying to listen to the audio. I wasn't completely ready for download the other day because I was like, wait, I really want to hear this. I want to hear what she does because
I want to hear it too. I really want to hear it. Let me know if you hear it.
Did you record anything? Did you record your author's note at the end or?
I recorded the author's note.
Your author's note's great too. It's really great. Okay, on your website, you have this line to describe yourself that says, "A seeker of lost stories." So I get where you do that. Do you have your next story in mind, or do you have a drawer full of possibilities?
Oh, I have so many, 27 that I'm working on. But because it takes me 5 to 7 years to write a book, and because of the research element, I work on 3 projects at once. So yes, I had a fellowship with the Bodleian Library last year at Oxford while I was researching Czech history for a future novel that pulls together former Czechoslovakia and now in modern day Czech Republic. A book that's coming out next year about historical stigma. People who know my first book, Between Shades of Grey, where people were exiled to these remote islands because of their, this regime that deemed them the enemy. Well, imagine 15 million people who were deemed an enemy of humanity because they were thought to have some very contagious disease. They were arrested. Their names were stripped from them. They were given new names. They were given inmate numbers. They were sent to these remote islands and colonies only to discover that contagious disease, it's not so contagious. And so I spent, now I'm on to 8 years where I've been traveling to all of these different countries, meeting with former patients, family members of victims, to really shine light in this darker corner of historical stigma.
Now, will that be for adults or YA? Do you know what you're doing?
It's for my YA publisher. I'm fortunate that my young adult books have a crossover readership, but it's considered a young adult book. Whereas A Fortune of Sand, because the Prohibition era called for an adult cast of characters. Right. And in young adult, normally the main character is a younger person.
Younger person from there. Well, I look forward to seeing what you do next. I thank you so much for joining us today. It's nice to catch up after all these years. It was like all that time. And all
I
these
know,
books
but again, really nice for me because that very first book, when I had no idea what I was doing, I was still working full-time in the music business. I would love to have this as a career. And I hate to say it, but you were the only one who had read the book at the table.
There's my Catholic school upbringing. Yes, you must read.
And I was so grateful. And you gave me the courage to go forward, to say, yes, this is important and books do mean something. And here we are years later and look what you have done and are doing and continue to do. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. We'll do this again. We shall do this.
Please, yes.
I think if we could have done this the first time, just think what that would have been like,
Incredible. Yeah.
And to everybody else, we look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks to.